Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Zach Tuck. I'm from the Low Carbon Vehicle Policy Team at Transport Scotland. There's a question for Alan from the Malcolm Group. Really interesting presentation. I was just wondering if Malcolm as a group had ever considered LNG as an alternative fuel for heavy goods vehicles, either dedicated LNG vehicles or maybe dual fuel diesel LNG vehicles? And if not, is that something you might consider in the future?
Yes, we have. In between 2011 and 2013, we equipped some 16 vehicles, what we call dual fuel, that were running off of LNG. What we found was that because we have a 24/7 operation, we did not see the benefits of running both fuels. One of the issues that you have is if you're making best use of the motorway network, especially at night, that's where it was most advantageous. But during a normal working day between 7 in the morning and 5 at night, the dual fuel vehicles didn't prove to be as viable as what they were purported to be. So we took the decision not to progress with it. But one of the other important things, and this is where the succession onto Euro 6 comes in, is because of the technology that the vehicles now need to have fitted in order to meet these quite strict emission standards. There is absolutely no space on a modern chassis to fit an additional fuel tank. Aside from putting it on the roof or whatever, buses can adapt this kind of technology. It's very, very difficult to make it fit. So for us to if you like, summarise your question, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. If I can be bold enough to pick out one operator, which is Muller-Wiseman, who do the milk, those kind of people, has been very, very successful for them because their chassis space, etc., moreover runs on a 2-axle vehicle and a 3-axle trailer. We're 3+3 at 44 tonnes, so we don't actually have the capacity to fit the equipment, which is unfortunate. So it works for some, but not for all.
Thanks very much for that very full answer. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
John Webster, Transform Scotland. 2 brief questions, one for Alec and one for Nicola. Alec, you've obviously got an ambitious remit, in terms of sustainable transport and cycling, walking and so on. I just wonder what sort of budget CESFANS have compared to something like 6 billion for the E9 and E96 motorways. And for Nicola, again, you've got this sort of, I think you said, encourage developments, where it doesn't require necessarily much travel by car and things. But I just wonder how this is enforced, because I don't recognise this as happening in practice. All around where I live, there are developments all over the place. They've got no access to public transport, and obviously will need more and more cars to be used. I just wonder, is that actually enforced in practice?
That's a lot of questions, Alec, if you want to make a start.
I'll have a start on budget. It's one of my favourite hobby horses, and I think the answer is minuscule by comparison. My own authority has a core budget, which is the core funding from Scottish Government and local authorities, of roughly 1.1 million a year, which is a drop in the ocean, quite frankly. Having said that, in recent years, over the past 5, 6, 7 years, we have worked hard to introduce European funding in terms of Interreg funding, ERDF funding, and so on. And on average, we've been running at roughly 2.5 million a year rather than 1.1 million a year. In addition to that, we've been, I think, very successful in getting funding from the Bus Improvement Fund, which is a challenge fund run by Scottish Government. And over the last couple of years, we've had about £2 million in total out of the Bus Improvement Fund to deliver real-time passenger information throughout the region. So while our core budget is very small, and even in comparison with the budget, I'll take you back to pre-first coalition government in the Scottish Parliament, when CESTRAN was running a £20 million budget for regional transport investment. And as part of the concordat with local government, all the RTP's capital budgets went off to local government. in the pious hope that it would find its way back to the regional transport partnerships from the local authorities in the event, because of recession, budget pressures. I suspect it's not being spent on regional projects. It's not even being spent on local transport projects. It's being spent on social work and education, where the bigger pressures are and the pressures for votes are. So we have, over the last certainly 5 years, been struggling generally with the RTPs quite significantly. We would love to do more. I'm hoping that as a result of the recent agreement we've made with the Transport Minister, that would be reflected in some movement in the current budget situation. But we would love to do more. That's why we're in partnership with everybody. We're in partnership with Sustrans now in terms of an extra 100,000 a year for cycling projects. So I sometimes think we spend more time chasing the money than actually delivering what the money could deliver, and hopefully that'll change as time goes on.
And just say, with a ludicrous budget, when you think of the benefits you could get from, some of the developments you would undertake.
Don't tell me, tell the Transport Minister.
I'll see Nicola tomorrow.
And another Nicola now to answer the second part of John's question about
Yeah.
planning in practice.
Very different, Nicola. I don't quite have the same power. In terms of policy, I think planning policy does promote brownfield development over greenfield, and I do think that there's a move away from the large out-of-town housing estate, which is not mixed use and doesn't have any other use and relies on the private car. I think we are seeing a move away from that. But I do take your point that I guess planning is a bit of a balancing act, and we're trying to balance having to deliver a 5-year effective land supply and all the other aspirations. I don't know whether Peter wants to answer from a more specific planning authority perspective.
In the 90s, 60% of our growth was using up spare infrastructure capacity in a whole range of villages round about Perth and Kinross. The strategy of the current plan concentrates on the borough towns and on Perth, where you can most expect there to be a good range of services. We expect about 90% of the planned sites will be within these areas now. And when you look at how we've chosen the strategic sites, getting the critical mass in new areas is key to getting a good bus service. And the ability to link up some of these areas with the one bus service allows you to get better public transport routes and invest in them, and invest in these key green or active travel routes into the town. Now, it's not the perfect answer, because we can't force the people who live in these areas to work in the economic development land in these areas, but they have that opportunity, there's more chance. So I think we're heading in the right direction. There's a long way to go in terms of getting proper integrated public transport systems.
Richard Dixon from Friends of the Earth Scotland. A question for Nicola. Thank you very much for that very clear and positive presentation. I was very glad to see that your first action was about Scottish planning policy, because if I was a local authority chief executive or director of planning reading the current version and trying to work out what is it the government really wants me to do, tackling air quality would not really feature on my radar at all, because it's very poor in there. You've mentioned the review of planning and the deadline for that consultation, so that's great. We can all input to that. But is it clear from that process when there will be a new revision of SPP or something different from SPP, so that we can also aim at that?
No, I think we don't have any clarification on timescales at the moment. I know the Scottish Government have just recently announced this review of planning, so I think the panel is going to report back before the elections next year, so maybe in March sometime, which I suppose is just before Purda. So I don't know if anything will happen before the elections. At the high-level group on planning last week, the Cabinet Secretary told us that there would be a new planning bill possibly in the second year of the new Parliament. So timescales wise, I can't imagine, I can't speak for the Scottish Government because I'm not I'm not an employee of the Scottish Government, but I can't imagine the Scottish Government spending the time and effort to update Scottish planning policy when we actually could have a completely different planning regime in 2 years' time. So I don't know, and I don't think the Scottish Government have set any set timescales just now for the update of Scottish planning policy. So it's a bit of a, I think we need to see it positively as an opportunity to engage with the planning system. But I don't know the timescales. I know there's some people here from Scottish Government planning just in the row in front of you, so I don't know whether maybe I can point you to chat to them later on.
Thanks. Andrew Jarvis from Stagecoach. I had an interesting journey this morning when I plugged my hybrid electric car in at Ferrytoll Park and Ride. I then boarded a Euro 5 emission level coach and then proceeded to Edinburgh along the bus lanes, which were very handy until we got to the congestion, when all the bus lanes then ran out. We then crawled into the city. If all the vehicles, the buses and coaches that I passed were all high Euro emission level, whether ourselves or Lothian or other operators, changing the air quality or the low emission zone elements for buses is going to make absolutely no difference until somebody tackles the elephant in the room, which is congestion and car congestion. Until we can get our politicians persuaded and they can persuade the electorate, we're not going to go anywhere. And certainly, Port Alex with 1.1 million a year, it's just going to make very little difference at all. Any thoughts from any on the panel as to how we persuade our politicians?
Well, I'm sure all of you will have a view on that. I don't know who's going to be brave enough to be the first speaker. Alec?
Yeah. We did a lot of transport modelling for the strategic development plan and the review of our own regional transport strategy. And I coined the technical phrase of the transport network, particularly the roads network, in and around Edinburgh, and it's stuffed. And it is at a stage where, to be frank, without major social change of attitudes towards driving your own private car rather and using either public transport or working from home or not travelling or whatever, investment cannot catch up with that, because we're at a stage now in and around the city where we've had such long periods of capacity restraint. In other words, congestion putting people off travelling or peak spreading as a result of the congestion, that if we try and build any more infrastructure with more capacity, then it will fill up overnight. And there are very good examples of that throughout the UK, throughout the world, in fact. So my view on it is pretty bleak, to be frank. And the way forward, the only way forward that I can see for this is a major shift of road space towards public transport, towards freight, and I might even add towards taxis. Why on earth we're letting motorbikes into the bus lanes, I really cannot understand, because they're about the only mode of motorised transport that doesn't get held up in congestion, because they wind their way through the traffic. So there needs to be a major policy shift towards more space for public transport. Now, when you talk about a historic city like Edinburgh, or most of our cities in the UK, that's no mean task. That's actually a very difficult thing to achieve. And people keep quoting, but look what's happened in Holland, look what's happened in Belgium, look what happened in Germany. They have big wide roads, they have cycle lanes, walkways, public transport corridors, plenty of space for the traffic. And then you sit back and you think, well, what state was Europe in after 1919? What state was Europe in after 1945? And that's why they've got big wide roads and they can do it. We were not in that position.
Okay, right,
so it's not
great.
easy.
Yep. If I can just draw you to a halt on that one. Peter, could you give us maybe a positive view from a planning, from a planning perspective?
I don't know if it's positive. The simple answer to how you influence politicians, it's called a vote. But what we don't have in this country is a proper integrated transport system. I got in the car today to go 7 miles into Perth to get a train this morning because I'd had to leave last night to get that train. On the way home, my train arrives at exactly the time my bus to the village leaves, and it's 400 metres away. Actually, the buses are more likely to be on time, unfortunately, because it won't work, than the trains. So, you know, we just don't have that integrated system. There are some good systems within the big cities, but a lot of Scotland is rural, and we have to remember that. I'm sure that wasn't
Stephen,
positive.
Very quickly, thanks, Peter.
So, very, very quickly, it's not actually contributing to the answer per se, but it was a point made earlier that you've got these post-it notes, the hexagons in your packs. So, firstly, can I make a call to provide those comments back generally, but also bear in mind that we've got an elected members workshops set up at the end of November, so if there's comments or points, how do you go about convincing the elected members, was one of the comments here. Maybe there's some comments you can capture on those post-it notes. You have to let us know what you want communicated.